There's a particular song called "When the Wolf is at the Door," and the line in the song is, "We can't just be healed, we must be transformed."
Can a song bring healing? My guest today is Carrie Newcomer, an Emmy and Grammy Award-winning songwriter and poet, many times known as a prairie mystic. I'm looking forward today to this conversation with her. Welcome, Carrie. Glad to have you here today.
So great to be with you.
I'm interested in that question for you to explore that a little bit. How does music and poetry bring healing, and maybe for your own life, and how do you think it does for other people too?
That's such a great question. And one I've thought about a lot in terms of the kinds of songs I write and I like to perform. I think at the heart of a good song, as a songwriter, at the heart of a good song is a place where we still recognize one another, that we still meet at our most human place and our most human experiences, where we all know what it feels like to love, to laugh, to grieve, all these things that are human. At the heart of a good song, we recognize one another. And in that sense, there's an opportunity there. I think it's one of the places, in our very kind of fractured, divided times, that we continue, in the arts, continue to recognize one another and see one another. And when we see one another, there's a much greater chance of reaching out. So in terms of healing divides, I'm biased. I'm a poet and an artist and a musician. And I think it's a very important piece of our puzzle in terms of healing our divides. Also for personal healing, I think music, sometimes I've had people come to me after a concert and say, that song, I didn't know how to say it yet, but it articulated something for me. It opened up something for me. And in that moment of articulation and the opening of the heart, I think there's also healing.
Yeah. In your album, Until Now, you explore the whole concept of transformation, and you speak about how we need to have more than just healing from crisis, but transformation. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, Until Now, my most recent album is called A Great Wild Mercy. But the one that came out right before that was called Until Now. And a lot of the songs were written during the pandemic when we were sheltering in place and dealing with a real crisis in our communities, in our personal lives, in our our community lives, in our global life. And so a lot of the songs had a lot to do with coming through crisis. There's a particular song called "When the Wolf is at the Door," and the line in the song is, "We can't just be healed, we must be transformed." That in the moment of a crisis, there is an opportunity. That when we came back from this, how would we choose to come back? How would we choose to reach out to one another? What would our experience in crisis of learning how important it is that we have community, that we tap into community, how important relationship is. So it's so there was a lot on that album about transformation.
So can you think of a time in your own life when you had that sense of crisis and there was some sense of transformation that came for you, and what did that look like?
Wow, again, you ask good questions. Yeah, I think there's many. And as in the course of a life, we will have like the great joys and great sorrows. And so crisis, there've been many times, the loss of a loved one, uh, the loss of a dream, the loss of a marriage. I went through that process at one point in my life. Often in times of great loss, that there again, in that crisis, there is a moment of transformation. I do have a song called "You Can Do This Hard Thing" that really is about, uh, you know, coming through a time of struggle or crisis, and I'll go ahead and sing it for you.
That'd be great.
It's
Thank you.
it's called "You Can Do This Hard Thing." A friend of mine had this phrase she would tell her children. She would tell her children, her two girls, when they were growing up, "You can do hard things." And I love the phrase because it acknowledged that what they were going to do was difficult. It was hard. Let's just say it. This is hard. And then at the same time, it really affirmed that everything had brought them here, and they had everything they needed to take that next step of transformation and healing and change. And so this is a song that came out. There at the table, with my head in my hands, a column of numbers I just did not understand. You said, add these together, carry the two. Now you can do this hard thing. You can do this hard thing. It's not easy, I know, but I believe that it's so. You can do this hard thing. At a cold winter station, breathing into our gloves, it would change me forever, leaving for God knows what. You carried my bags, you said I'll wait for you. You can do this hard thing. You can do this hard thing. It's not easy, I know, but I believe that it's so. You can do this hard thing. Late at night I called, and you answered the phone. The worst, it had happened, and I did not want to be alone. You quietly listened. You said, we'll see this through. You can do this hard thing. You can do this hard thing. It's not easy, I know, but I believe that it's so. You can do this hard thing. Here we stand, breathless and pressed in hard times, hearts hung like laundry on backyard clotheslines. Impossible just takes a little more time. From the muddy ground comes a green volunteer. In a place we thought barren, new life appears. Morning will come whistling some comforting tune for you. You can do this hard thing. You can do this hard thing. It's not easy, I know, but I believe that it's so. You can do this hard thing.
Oh, wow. How beautiful.
Thank
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just imagine there are people who are really listening or watching this, and they're getting ready. They're having to do a hard thing right now, and they're feeling that, boy, this is so hard, and your message is so inspiring because I love that line. It's not impossible. It takes a little more time, but
Yeah,
you can do this.
yeah, and, you know, it is a song of encouragement, and, because how many times has someone said to me in my lifetime, "Carrie, you can do this," and because they believed, it helped me believe. So, so yeah, it was a song of encouragement, a song of crisis and difficulty, and at the same time, one of encouragement and love and transformation. From the muddy ground comes a green volunteer. In a place we thought barren, new life appears. So, you know, that's transformation.
And I think that's really the real, opportunity, but, some people, when they're going through crisis, can they be open to that transformation, or do they shut down and become bitter and hard? And, that's the real, moment in our life when we can grow from that, and sometimes we grow the hardest in the difficult times.
And that's, you know, and it's and you try never to be Pollyanna about that.
Right.
You know, what's hard is difficult. You know, grief is grief. It should not be diminished. My friend Parker Palmer, I've done a lot of work with Parker, an amazing Quaker author and philosopher, and I just adore him and done a lot of work with Parker. And he talks about the broken open heart. That if we live, at some point our hearts will be broken. And we can choose in that moment whether it's broken in a million shards and goes out like shrapnel, or if it's broken open to a greater capacity for empathy, for compassion. But it's not easy, and it's a process, and the impossible just takes a little more time.
Yeah, and I know that your background is Quaker as well, and I'm interested in how your faith has been a part of that. How has that helped you come through that time? Um, how has that helped shape who you are?
Well, it's interesting. I sojourn in a lot of spiritual communities, but I probably have spent a lot of time with the Quakers. And I think I was very attracted to the silent meditation and worship service of the Quaker community, unprogrammed Quaker community. We do a lot of talking at the great luminous, however we perceive that to be. But I really appreciated that in that silence is a moment to listen and to hear the deep calling of our own. You know, the Quakers call it the inner light. That each one of us has a piece of that greater light, and that it can be trusted. And listening is a very important piece of that process. So I really appreciate that. Now, I didn't grow up Quaker. My mom was her father immigrated from Italy. She was first generation from the Italian, and so she was from a Catholic background. And my father was from a Mennonite background, Mennonite Methodist, and his mother came from the Amish community. So I'm the only Italian Amish person on the planet, I think, except my two sisters. So, um, so, but overall, I think you could always call myself a seeker. That
Yeah.
I've had a great affinity for the sacred, for experiencing the sacred, particularly in our daily lives, in the most ordinary moments. And a lot of my songs really explore that idea. Where does something sacred show up in our daily lives, even in the most ordinary moments? Um, yeah. And I
I
guess
think
I love Sacred Rebel because I think part of that whole journey for me is that I just have never wanted to put something luminous and sacred in such a small container,
Mhm.
you know? So I love I actually love the name of this podcast.
Well, part of my whole reason for doing this is to celebrate. I think, um, each of us, as we find our own voice, and how we can let go of some of our background, take the good things, but also find our own place, not the expectations of other people. And that's hard sometimes. And, here you are as a songwriter and poet. And I'm sure, when you started out, there were people who said, oh, you need to get a real job. What do you think you're doing? You can't be doing that.
Well, and I think we have deep calls in this world, callings in this world. And yeah, I mean, think about it, junior high school career day when you were a kid, you know, what were at the tops of that list? There was doctor, there was lawyer, there was I mean, there were these things. Traveling folk singer was never on that list. It was a singer-songwriter with a fascination with the sacred. That was just not at the top of the list on junior high school career day. Um, but I think I always had this great love and affinity for music and for story, for language and poetry, for how the spirit moves in the world and in our lives. And so I decided to follow it wherever that would take me. Um, and I'm really grateful. I've made my life in this interesting intersection of art and music and spiritual exploration. And um, you know, uh, if someone had asked me in my early 20s, devise, think up, you know, imagine what that could look like, a life in the arts could look like. And I'm really glad um, that it's turned out way more interesting and creative and unexpected than I ever could have imagined. So some of it's being open to what.
Yeah. Were there times when you were feeling like I'm just going to give all this up? I can't do this. Um, were you
Yeah,
times?
yeah, of course. I think yeah, that the life in the arts is beautiful and so satisfying, and at the same time, it's really challenging. Our society is not really set up well for musicians and artists to follow their gift and that the calling they were really called to do. And so it's not really set up very well for us. So there's challenges. There's always challenges. And yeah, there were many times when the prayer was, okay, if I can do something else, maybe you could let me know. Um, but no, it was like this is the thread. And there were times when I did try to do something else, and it always called me back.
Mhm.
It always called me back. And I'm glad I followed.
And I always encourage people to listening to that voice because, we do get, discouraged at times. We question ourselves, but when we find that we're doing something that we have passion for,
Hmm.
not just for money or for success or those things, but when you find like you're really making a difference and being filled, that's the thing. And a lot of times, young ministers, they're ready to quit ministry. They start out as a minister and they're frustrated, and I tell them, don't quit on Monday. If by Thursday you still want to quit, then maybe. Well, by Thursday, life has gotten better after Sunday, and things have changed. And I think that's a lot for a lot of us. We're at places where we're ready to give up, but if we just give ourselves a little space, um, that will
Yeah.
work. I'm interested in when you think of your career and some of your wonderful experiences in many different ways. Can you share maybe one of those that really stand out to you that was such a highlight to you or a memorable moment to you? And what was it about it that made it that?
Gosh, there's so many. Like I said, I'm so grateful for all you know, I've traveled all over the world and all over this country and in all kinds of contexts. Um, I'm really grateful that it has taken me into really interesting communities, interfaith communities, into spiritual community, into justice communities, and I, so it's hard for me to pinpoint just one. I'm actually in the process of writing a book, and because there's a lot, but um, I think offhand, I did a couple tours in India, was touring in India for a month, each time, and, yeah, they brought me in to, first of all, work with an embassy school creating songs with the students on the topics of, uh, peace and justice, and then after that, the American Embassy sent me all over the country to sing for Indian audiences. And because I've done a lot of work with social service organizations, worked with a lot of young Indians who were doing programs in communities all over India in the areas of health and hunger and working with particularly young people. And so it was, that was both tours were um, are very were very transformative and amazing for me. Um, Also, yeah, I said there's just been a lot of different things. And I think this idea too of the uh, kind of going back a little bit to the beginning of our conversation of transformation. I think right now we are living in a time of great transformation and great challenge um and you know, I from my viewpoint, I travel, like I said, I travel to a lot of communities, and I'm not the Rolling Stones, and so I'm not going from arena to arena in my private jet. So, um, I see communities close up, and every single community I visit, there are people working very hard in their own way to make the world a little better, kinder place. Um, and that's everywhere. Not one or some or most. Every single community I visit, there are people of good heart and good spirit who are doing what they can in their own way to make that world a little kinder. I have this sense. Okay, John Paul Lederach, who is a expert in nonviolent conflict resolution. I love John Paul. He has some beautiful books, and he's also a poet as well. And I had a conversation with him, and he said, you know, my work for the better, kinder, more peaceful, more just world, that work uh, in its final form, peace, love, truth, justice, in its final and completed form, will most likely not happen in my lifetime. We're going to get a ways down the road, but it will most likely not happen in its final completed form in my lifetime. And so my work for that better world has to be the orientation of my life, not just the destination.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've found that to be such a powerful statement that love and kindness and how we live our daily lives is so powerful and so important. And it is the orientation of my life. When I contribute to that better, kinder world in my own way.
Yes.
I'm doing my part, and it is the orientation of my life. This is how we do it each day by day, person by person.
And I think that's so beautiful and important because it is that magic in the mundane, it is the sacredness in those daily lives and in what we're doing, the ripple effect that it has, because we aren't going to change the world, but we have a ripple effect of what we do. And, that's, of course, I think anybody trying to make an effort in trying to do something positive for the world sometimes ask, well, does it make any difference? And oh, I'm just going to give up. But then you continue on because you can do your own thing.
And I think that's so important right now. There's a lot of sorrows in this world, and we're hearing about them every day. It's coming sometimes like a tsunami at us, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed sometimes, but we have tremendous power in how we choose to live our daily lives. We have tremendous power that what has saved us, what it is still here to save us, generosity, hospitality, kindness, good parenting, good grandparenting, humor, all these, you know, all these things and more, all these things that have always risen up out of the human spirit are still here and completely available to us. They haven't gone away. So, and I see that right now in how people are reacting to the troubles of this time.
I think that's interesting, your perception of that, because a lot of people would say, "Oh, we're so polarized. The world's the worst, it's hardest time in our society than it is," which if you look back at history, it isn't. But because you feel that way, because you feel overwhelmed by social media, many people feel like, we're on this really crisis point. And yet you made a point, which I really agree with, that this is in a moment of transformation. And why do you see that as a time of transformation rather than a time of crisis and apocalypse?
Well, I see it as both. There is that balancing of knowing. I have a song called The Beautiful Not Yet. And that really explores this idea that this must be the orientation of my life, not just a destination in my life, because we're going to be working on these things for a long time. And balancing that with what Martin Luther King called the fierce urgency of now, and uh, and taking daily action. Um, my I'm quoting Parker Palmer again, which I do probably too often, but my favorite definition of hope he gave me. He wrote he was writing something and he sent it to me and he said, "Hope is holding in creative tension everything that is with everything that could and should be, and each day taking some action to narrow the distance between the two." I'm going to say that again. Hope is holding in creative tension all that is, all that could and should be, and then what we do in our daily lives to narrow the distance. Um, I just, I love that idea. And it's also the balancing of this being the orientation of work we will be doing for a long time with the fierce urgency of now. And this is a question I ask myself, every morning, particularly in these troubled times, is what is mine and who will go with me? And that has to do with what are my gifts? What can I contribute? I'm a songwriter. I'm a poet. And so I do that with all the love and courage I can. Um, what is mine to do? But also my community, and who will go with me? Who is my community? Where can I reach out? Where can I even reach across that creates that important infrastructure, the weaving, the reweaving of things that have feel frayed for a while. Yeah, so I love that definition of hope because it really does balance that idea of the fierce urgency now, the beautiful but not yet, and what we do each day and how powerful that is. Um,
Wow. Um, I just want to sit with that a little bit because I think that's very important for all of our lives when we're so caught up in being so busy and going, so quickly,
Mhm.
task after task and moving, and not taking that moment of reflecting, thinking about where we are, and inviting people to join with us, so we aren't alone. And because the more relationships we have with people who are joining with us in our vision and our hope for what we want to create in the world, gives us strength. One of the things that you're committed to, I know, is issues of justice and in finding ways of being an advocate for those who've been disenfranchised, those who maybe are on the outside and looked down upon. And I'm wondering, how does music, you think, reach people where political arguments or religious arguments really don't. And how does that help through music to bring some sense of justice to us?
I think it's a piece of the puzzle. I can't tell you how many, conferences or great rallies I've gone to, and it's one person talking after another. And inside my musician head, I said, okay, where's the songs? Um, movements for change need songs. They need music. That's something that has always accompanied movements for positive change. And so I think, I think music is an important piece of the puzzle. I think it's all important, but I think music is an important piece. The arts are an important piece of that puzzle. Going back to the beginning of the conversation, it's because it's one of those places where we meet one another again. People say that we are divided and there are no bridges. I don't believe that's true, because I see it happen every time I encounter a group singing together, because everyone in that community is not exactly the same. They're not exactly from the same background or even opinions. When they sing together, there was someone sent me a scientific study that when we sing together, our hearts begin to beat together. Our hearts literally sync up when we sing together. One of the powerful things about being in spiritual communities, one of the few places in our culture, other than the national anthem at the beginning of football games, is we sing together. And there's something that happens that we become connected in this really profound spiritual and even physical way. Our hearts beat together. And so I think music, also I think there's an opening with music. I write music that talks about the sacred, that talks about issues of justice or transformation. But it's really important as a songwriter that I don't hit people on the head. No one wants to get hit on the head. Ow, that hurts. Or it's just kind of. But so in a song, there is an opportunity to tell a story, and if I tell the story and I sing the story in a way that is powerful, that is kind-hearted at its core, that's love made visible, and at its core. If I do the song in a way, if I tell the story, a human story, it becomes our story. It's not just my story. I have no interest in writing my diary and putting it into a song. I have journals for that. The stories I choose to tell, even though they might use some of my own personal details, it's a human story. It's where we connect. It's where we see one another. And there's an opportunity in that. And there's also, as an artist, a responsibility in that I'm respectful for that to the person who has so graciously opened their heart to this story and opened their heart to this song. So I think about that. It's also a balancing act, because it's also the first fierce urgency, and now it's also telling the truth as clearly as I know how. A lot of people talk to me about, have I ever written an angry song? You betcha. I have, because that's also part of the human experience. And in these times, if you're not angry, there is a lot of things going on in our world right now. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And I think in spiritual communities, we're not supposed to talk about that, or we're supposed to kind of put that under the rug. But there's something that happens that is righteous anger. And righteous anger comes out of what we love. That we love justice, that we love that better world we long for. We love the people who may be suffering or somehow disenfranchised. Righteous anger comes out of love. And so with that is another opportunity for transformation, to transform righteous anger into loving action. You know, there is and so a lot of times my songs, if they are dealing with hard issues, they're talking about that transformation. What do we do with this? What is mine? Who will go with me? And how can this concern be transformed into loving action?
Things, and you have a new album coming out. When will that be released?
Next year sometime.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're hoping by the fall, right before the close of the year. So we'll see if all things go on schedule.
And you do have a podcast that you and Parker Palmer do together, is that right?
Yes, it's called The Growing Edge, and I love doing the podcast. And there's a lot of archives. There's you can go to the website or anywhere you get your podcast for the Growing Edge podcast with Parker J. Palmer and Carrie Newcomer. And I do, as I said, I have a Substack page or offering. I do a bi-weekly column there and also sometimes interviews. And that's called A Gathering of Spirits. And yeah, and also, there's my website, and it can let you know where my shows are and the kinds of retreats I do sometimes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your music and some of your poetry and really just a part of yourself. It's when we have these type of conversations, I feel so enlightened and blessed, and I hope other people do. And that's what I want to encourage people to have conversations with each other, like we're having. And I want to thank you for those who are listening, and that you may continue on. Keep your hearts and your minds open, sacred rebels. Thank you, Carrie, for being here today.
Thank you.